I'm 37M, and I finally stood up to my wife's entitled family after they took over my vacation home and mocked me for being a pushover. My wife and I met 10 years ago at a friend's barbecue. We hit it off instantly. She was smart, funny, and we balanced each other out well. After dating for 2 years, we got married, and for the first few years, life was great. I work as a financial advisor. She's in marketing, and we built a comfortable life together in suburban Chicago. 5 years ago, I inherited a lakeside cabin in northern Wisconsin from my grandfather. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was beautiful. 3 bedrooms, big windows overlooking the water, a private dock, and a small boat. My grandfather had bought the land for next to nothing decades ago and built the cabin himself. It was a family treasure, and I was honored he left it to me. The cabin became our escape. We'd spend summer weekends and some winter holidays there, just disconnecting, hiking, fishing, or watching the sunset from the dock. It was our peaceful retreat, and honestly, it strengthened our marriage. Things changed 2 years ago when my in-laws hit financial trouble. My father-in-law made some bad investments, forcing them to downsize from their large suburban home to an apartment. My mother-in-law took it especially hard. She had always been about keeping up appearances. When they visited our house afterward, I noticed the way she eyed everything with envy. Comments like, "You two certainly landed on your feet," or "Must be nice to have so much space," became common. My wife defended them, saying they were just adjusting. Then they visited the cabin. My wife planned a weekend trip to cheer them up, and I agreed. I wanted to be supportive. But from the moment my mother-in-law stepped inside, I noticed something off. She walked through like she was assessing the property, touching my grandfather's handmade woodwork and looking around like she was mentally appraising it. "This place must be worth a fortune now," she said while staring at the lakefront. "You barely use it," my father-in-law added. "We come up when we can," I replied. "It's a special place." "Seems wasteful to have it sitting empty most of the time," my mother-in-law mused. By the end of the weekend, they had invited themselves back for a week-long stay the next month. My wife was happy they loved the place, and I didn't push back. Family helps family, right? That week turned into 2. Then they started house-sitting while we weren't there. During our visits, I noticed things changing. Furniture rearranged, my grandfather's fishing gear shoved into shed, and our family photos replaced with theirs. When I mentioned it to my wife, she brushed it off. "They're just making themselves comfortable. What's the big deal?" The real alarm came when my brother-in-law called to thank me for letting him use the boat. I never gave permission. When I brought it up to my wife, she dismissed it. My dad probably told him it was fine. The boat's just sitting there anyway. "That's not the point," I said. "It's about respect. They should ask first. Why are you being so possessive? It's just family using it." Then I got a call from a year-round neighbor near the cabin. He told me my in-laws had been living there full-time for months. Worse, they had been telling people they were the new owners. I confronted my wife that night. "Did you know your parents have been living at the cabin full-time?" She would meet my eyes. "Their lease ended, and they're looking for something permanent. And you didn't think to discuss this with me? It's sitting empty most of the time anyway. What's the harm?" "How long have they been there?" "About 3 months." 3 months? And you never told me? "Because I knew you'd react like this. You're being selfish." I drove up to the cabin that weekend to talk to them directly. My wife refused to come, saying I was overreacting. When I arrived, I was stunned. Not only were my in-laws living there, but my sister-in-law, her husband, and their 2 kids were also staying in the guest rooms. The place was packed with their stuff. My grandfather's handcrafted furniture had been shoved into the garage to make space for theirs. My mother-in-law answered the door, clearly surprised. "We weren't expecting you this weekend." "Clearly," I said, looking past her at the chaos. "May I come in?" She reluctantly let me inside. My father-in-law was lounging in my grandfather's recliner, the only piece of furniture they hadn't moved. "What brings you up here?" he asked casually. "We need to talk," I said. "My neighbor called and said you've been living here for months." My father-in-law muted the TV. "Your wife said it was fine. We're family, after all." She didn't discuss it with me, and this isn't what I agreed to. This cabin was my grandfather's legacy. I don't mind family visiting, but you moved in without asking. My mother-in-law scoffed. It's just sitting empty most of the time. Seems selfish to keep it all to yourself. I understand you're struggling, but do you? My sister-in-law walked in. Mom and Dad lost everything, and you're complaining about a cabin you barely use? I tried again. I'm not saying you can't use it. I'm saying we need to discuss boundaries. My mother-in-law laughed. Listen to him trying to sound tough. My sister-in-law joined in. We all know you're too weak to stand up for yourself. That's why your wife didn't bother asking. She knew you'd cave. Her husband smirked. He's always been a doormat. Something clicked. Not anger, clarity. A decade of similar moments flashed through my mind. The time my sister-in-law borrowed my wife's car for 3 months. The vacation they hijacked. The countless dinners where they mocked me while I paid the bill. I simply smiled. You're right. I have been too accommodating. Their laughter faltered. I'll be leaving now. I said, enjoy the cabin for tonight. My sister-in-law smirked. See? Told you he'd back down. I drove to a nearby town, checked into a motel, and made 3 phone calls. To my lawyer, the county sheriff's office, and a locksmith. The next morning, I arrived with the sheriff and my lawyer. My in-laws were still in their pajamas when we knocked. What's going on? My father-in-law demanded. The sheriff stepped forward. Sir, you have no legal right to occupy this property. You have 4 hours to vacate. My mother-in-law turned pale. You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my concern, I said. You had 3 months rent-free to figure that out. But your wife said, she's not on the deed. This cabin belongs to me. This is ridiculous, my mother-in-law shouted. Family doesn't take advantage of family, I said. Family doesn't mock someone who helps them. Family asks before moving into someone else's home. While they packed, I walked through the locksmith, who changed all the locks and installed a security system with cameras I could monitor from my phone. For the first time in years, I finally stood my ground. My phone rang. It was my wife. What the heck do you think you're doing? She screamed. My mom just called, crying. I'm removing trespassers from my property. I answered calmly. They're not trespassers. They're my family, who moved in without my permission and have been living there for 3 months. That's trespassing. I gave them permission. You don't have the legal authority to do that. The cabin is in my name only. There was a pause. What's happened to you? You're not the man I married. You're right. The man you married was a doormat, according to your family. They helped me see that clearly yesterday. What are you talking about? Ask them what they said to me. Ask them how they laughed and mocked me for being too weak to stand up for myself. They were quite proud of it. I'm sure they were just joking. It doesn't matter. The decision is made. They have 3 hours left to leave. If you do this, there's no coming back from it, she threatened. I thought about it. Maybe that's the best. I'll be home tomorrow. We can talk about our future then. I hung up and turned to my lawyer. I'd like to discuss options for separation. He nodded. We can talk after this is handled. By early afternoon, my in-laws had packed their essentials into their cars. They left with cold glares and threats of payback. My mother-in-law dramatically told her kids to say goodbye to the lake forever, right where I could hear, trying to make me feel guilty. Once they were gone, the locksmith finished up, and the sheriff left after ensuring the property was secure. I stayed that night in the cabin alone, sitting in my grandfather's recliner that I had brought back in from the garage, looking out at the peaceful lake. The next morning, I drove back to our Chicago home. My wife was waiting, her eyes red from crying. I can't believe you'd do this to my family, she said as I walked in. I can't believe you'd move your family into my cabin without asking me, I countered, or that you'd hide it from me for 3 months. They needed help, and I would have helped. If you'd been honest with me, we could have worked out a temporary arrangement with clear boundaries and an end date. Instead, you went behind my back. She looked away. They said you wouldn't understand. And you believe them over me? Your husband of 8 years. You don't know what it's like for them. They lost everything because of your father's bad investment choices, not some tragedy beyond his control. And regardless, that doesn't give them the right to take what's mine. Is that all you care about? Your things? No. I care about respect. I care about honesty. I care about not being taken advantage of by people who mock me behind my back, or to my face. Her expression changed. What are you talking about? Your family called me a doormat to my face. They laughed about how weak I am, how I never stand up for myself. Your sister even brought up how I paid for the wedding bar without complaint as proof. They shouldn't have said that, but they weren't wrong, were they? That's how all of you see me. The accommodating husband who goes along with whatever your family wants. The walking ATM who picks up dinner checks and covers expenses without complaint. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you stood up for me against your family? When have you ever taken my side in a disagreement with them? She had no answer. I've been talking to a lawyer. I continued. I'm filing for separation. I'll be staying at the cabin for now. You're leaving me because I helped my family? I'm leaving because you betrayed my trust, hid things from me, and let your family take advantage of me for years. I deserve better than that. She started crying again. Please don't do this. We can work it out. Maybe we can, but I need time and space to think about what I want. Your family has been controlling our marriage for too long. It's time I took back some control. I packed enough clothes for a couple weeks and some essentials. As I loaded my car, my phone started blowing up with messages from my in-laws. My mother-in-law demanded I reconsider this cruel eviction. My father-in-law called me selfish and heartless. My sister-in-law threatened to tell everyone what a terrible person I was. I blocked their numbers one by one. The only message that made me pause came from my brother-in-law, who hadn't been at the cabin during the drama. I get why you did what you did. They've always taken advantage. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I used your boat without asking. I didn't block him. Over the next few days, the story spread through my wife's extended family. I got angry calls from aunts and cousins I'd barely met. I let them all go to voicemail. My wife texted constantly, switching between anger and begging. Then something unexpected happened. My father-in-law's sister, my wife's aunt, called. I'm not calling to yell at you, she said. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you're wrong. Thank you, I replied, surprised. My brother has been taking advantage of people his whole life. Our parents bailed him out of debt twice before they passed. He convinced our younger sister to co-sign a loan, then defaulted, ruining her credit. This is his pattern. We talked for almost an hour. She explained behaviors I'd seen but never fully understood. My father-in-law's entitlement, my mother-in-law's materialism, and how they had raised my wife to believe family obligation trumped everything, especially when it benefited them. Your wife isn't a bad person, she said before we hung up. She's been trained to enable her father's behavior. It'll take time for her to see it, if she ever does. A week later, I got an email from my father-in-law. I want to apologize for our behavior. We took advantage of your generosity and overstayed our welcome at the cabin. The things we said to you were inexcusable, and I'm deeply ashamed. We've secured an apartment and are working to get back on our feet. I hope in time you can forgive us. I didn't answer right away. The timing was suspicious after they'd exhausted all other options. My suspicion was confirmed when my wife called. Did you get my dad's email? She asked, sounding hopeful. I did. So you'll let them come back to the cabin? And there it was, the real reason behind the apology. No, they will never stay at the cabin again. But he apologized. An apology doesn't erase consequences. They disrespected my property and me. Those bridges are burned. She was quiet. What about us? That depends on you. I need to know that you're my partner, not just your family's advocate. I need to know you respect me and my boundaries. I do respect you. Your actions say otherwise. It took months of counseling, but things slowly changed. My wife acknowledged that she had been conditioned to put her parents' needs above everything else. She started setting boundaries, After 4 months of separation, I moved back home on a trial basis, with clear rules. The cabin remains my retreat. Sometimes my wife joins me, but often I go alone, enjoying the peace my grandfather intended this place to provide. I've learned that standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you someone worthy of respect. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is enforce your boundaries, even when it hurts.